Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about values. So important. So Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to values?
So values is an interesting topic to me because it took a really long time for me to understand sort of how they fit into my life or how it could be useful. Because for me, for a very long time, values were sort of this like nebulous, just sort of like, oh, look at all these positive words of things that you probably want or want to do or be or whatever else. And so it was hard for me to really like nail down how to have values in a useful way. Sounds kind of stupid. But before that, I would have, I would just look at values as like, of course, everyone wants to have all of these things.
Right.
And it took a long time for me to realize that the value of values is in figuring out how these things sort of play out relative to each other, because there are times that sort of different choices conflict against different values, but if you know which ones are more important to you, it's easier to make the choice that most aligns with you. That's sort of my initial take. I'd be curious where you're at.
Yeah, it's somewhat similar in that I think, a lot of people, if they were to like look at a list of values, they'd be like, well, all of these sound good. I mean, like I would value all these values. But how do you go about that process of narrowing it down? And what I think of is just like, actually look at which values are actually being reflected in your life. Like for example, if you value health, but you're never working out or you're always eating out, maybe that's not, even though you want it to be a strong value that's important to you, how it's showing up in your life is not reflective of that. And you could always do things to change that if that is something you want to work towards. So that's an example that I want people to like consider when they're evaluating their values. It's like, how is it showing up?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, what are you actually doing compared to what the value is? Because, in the same vein as what we've been talking about, you think about something like, I'll just stick with health. I'm sure the vast majority of people would say, oh yeah, I value health. But like you said, when you actually look at the actions you're taking, do they align with those values?
Right.
And I think that's also why it's important to get clear on which values are most important to you, because at least for myself, if I look through a huge list of values, I can go through all of them and say, oh yeah, all of these look nice to me. But the ones that are actually important enough to me to work on and spend time on changing sort of my actions or thought patterns around, that's a little bit different of a conversation, because there are some values or things that I just don't weigh as heavily, and so I'm not as motivated to actually make changes in my actions and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. And it makes me think about, when you are creating those values, like also like the reverse of creating those actions that would be in alignment with those values. So let's say you want health to be a value, but it's not really showing up. It's like, okay, if this is really important to you, what are you going to do to make it a priority so it's actually showing up for you in that way?
Yeah, and I think this kind of connects nicely into another topic I wanted to connect this with. But I've found that values are extremely important when setting goals, right? Sort of this like productivity piece connects in well, because for me at least, and what I've seen with a lot of people, the best way to sort of optimize my life, or the way that I'm going to end up the happiest, is to make my goals subservient to values. So, if it's something like health, well, health by itself isn't necessarily an action I can take, right? That's not like something I can do. So I can take that value and sort of split a goal off out of it and say, I don't know, I want to be able to run a 6-minute mile. We'll say that is the goal.
Yeah.
And then from there, I can sort of split out sub goals to actually that help me to reach that goal. So I'll run a mile every day at whatever, a 10-minute mile, and then slowly work my way up. And now I'm kind of getting off into the weeds, but I think what is really valuable is being able to tie these goals back into your values, right? It kind of works both ways, because in the past, I found that I had goals that I had set for myself that were not necessarily attached to a value. And sometimes I would be working on it or finish it and then wonder why I did it in the first place.
Right.
One clear example that comes to mind is, for a long period of time, I was working on learning to speak Spanish as a goal, because I just thought, oh, that's something productive to do. And at a certain point, I started getting kind of sick of forcing myself to do it. And I sat down to think about, like, what value does this fulfill for me? And it was really hard for me to find a value for myself to attach that to. And so I eventually just switched that goal for something else that more readily aligned with my values. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing to do or practice or learn or whatever else, but I kept forcing myself to do it, and it was painful instead of pleasant. And it wasn't until I stepped back and looked at how it connected to my values that I realized, I don't know if this is how I want to be spending my time.
Yeah, definitely. And that you make a good point there, because I think underneath that is sometimes having the value is kind of motivating you to do the goal to some degree. Not always is the case, but sometimes that can be a helpful factor. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention was that when it comes to values, thinking of they're not all going to be equally weighted in your life and priority wise. For example, I was just thinking my top value is family for me. And if someone is struggling with the value of health is also a value of mine. But I think family supersedes that, because it's well, I want to have health because I want to have energy for when I have kids and to be able to see them when they go off to college and those major milestones. That's important, but it's really to serve the higher value of family ultimately. And that I think would motivate me more than just well, I'm just exercising to exercise, not really considering the bigger picture.
Yeah, kind of what you mentioned is one of the best ways that I found to be able to actually make sort of your list of values or refine it out. I don't know off the top of my head any resources for it, but I know for sure I've done, sort of a quiz or a test or something.
Right.
That basically it's pretty simple. All it does is just pair, sets of values, and it just keeps giving you do you prefer this or this, this or this, this or this? And at the end, through some magic of math, is able to tell you sort of the way that you have stacked ranked them. I found that to be extremely valuable for the reason that you said, some of my values are subservient to my other values, and they only exist because they're useful for sort of fulfilling that higher level value or the thing that is most important. The other thing that it helps with is I've sort of had instances where I've had something that's a value, but I don't necessarily have a clear positioning of where it is. Off the top of my head, something like honesty, where it's oh, I value honesty, but how much do I value honesty? Do I value it more than family? Do I value it more than health and all those other things? So doing a test like that, or sort of stack ranking them in that way, helps put things just in order so you can see sort of where different values fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can really make the difference for a lot of people. And actually, it just made me think I do have this values worksheet that sometimes I give my patients when they're kind of lost at what to focus on, because there's so many things that they could focus on, because not only do I help people with their health, but it's helping them feel happier. And sometimes that involves improving their relationships or improving their happiness at work or things like that, which is important to feed health ultimately. So I just pulled up the worksheet, and some of the things that they have you do is assess what are your 5 core values. But then next to that, you rate yourself on how you live by those core values, which is kind of what we were talking about before. And so on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I always live by this value, 5 being I rarely live by this value. And that kind of helps you determine, it's like, how am I really like in sync with living by this value all the time? Because again, it's like going back to the health example. If you're like saying health is so important to me, but you're rarely rarely living by that value, then it's like that might be lower on your list. And even though you don't want that to be the case, that's just kind of how it is. And then the other thing that they have you do is some questions to reflect on helping you establish your values, and like looking at like how your values showing up in your life. But some questions, I'm not going to read them all, but just a few they toss out there are like, on a scale of like 1 to 5, like 1 being strongly disagree to 5 strongly agree. Like some questions are like, I know what my top 5 values are. Like, how strongly do you agree with that or not? Or my family and friends know my values. That's another like way to reflect on like, how are my values showing up, and can my friends and family actually see that? Or like, I base my goals on my values, or I test decisions based on my values. And I discuss it. So it's not, and my work reflects my values. So those are just some examples, questions, to help you figure out like, how important is this to you, and how is it showing up? Because again, like what you want to be your values might not be in alignment with how it shows up in your life.
Yeah, and I've also found that when my actions are most aligned with my values, that's when I feel the happiest and feel the best.
Oh, totally.
So a lot of the times, when I was early into it, I would set up some things that I thought were my values and then sort of align my actions closer and closer. And if I wasn't actually feeling sort of happiness, or I'll use purpose, because purpose is probably like a better word here. But if I wasn't feeling purpose tied to sort of those actions in relation to those values, then I would sort of go back to the drawing board. And that's helped me. So it's sort of like, it's not this one and done, oh, I set my values, oh, I adjusted my actions, so now that I live up to them and now I'm happy and everything's perfect. But
Right.
for me, it's been more of this process of like, I think these are my values. And then I adjust my actions to get closer to that. And sometimes, or like some percentage of that seems to improve my life. And then I go back to the drawing board and go like, well, actually, this might not be as high of a value as I thought it was. And this other thing might be a little bit more. So like over the years, the values themselves have gotten tighter and tighter. And by that I mean they don't churn as much, but there's still an evolution that happens too, and in ways that are sort of related to stages of life, right? Sometimes, even though I've sort of built out these core values, and they've gotten more and more clear for me and concrete, sometimes just changes in my life will happen where I'm like, okay, well, actually, this thing has shifted down. If you like, career has dropped a few notches because I'm feeling really confident in where I'm at and I'm feeling fulfilled and whatever else. And this other thing has jumped up a few, like friendship or sort of whatever else.
Yeah.
So I say all that mainly to highlight two things. One, which is when my actions are aligned with my values, that's when I've felt the best. And in talking with other people, that's relatively or generally true. And the second one is it's for me, it has not been sort of this static journey. It's been an ongoing sort of like, let me try this. Okay, this is achieving the results and whatnot that I want. And all that is just to say, like, it is a little bit, it can be for some people, at least for me, a little bit harder to sort of nail these things down than what it seems like it might be on the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. It can totally change over time based on your life situation or your stage of life that you're in. And, sometimes they can be equally weighted, or it's kind of hard to determine which one is a bigger one than the other, because and then sometimes there's values that are kind of like similar or parallel that you're like, can I group that into one value or not? But anyways, I was curious, like, what I know I've done this before and I can't remember all my values off the top of my head. So I'm like, I know like family was number 1, but I'd be curious to hear what some of your values are. And I can try to maybe remember some of my other values and really see if it's really that important, if I can't even remember them all.
Yeah, it's a funny timing question because this is a time that I actually just went over what I had listed as my values
Oh,
and what I was going
oh, nice.
over.
Mhm.
Well, hold on, and decided that what I had previously listed is not what I want to
It's not.
continue with.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm dead center in the middle of sort of
Mhm.
starting from scratch on some of these things.
Mhm.
Um, so I can give you a couple things that have like historically been in the mix. However, it
Yeah,
is currently an
it's
in sort
right.
of project.
Constantly evolving. Yeah.
So one of the highest ones for me is health. That's very important to me. I just feel like if I don't feel good, I struggle to really do anything else,
Yeah.
or to contribute to anything in any meaningful way.
Mhm.
Another one for me is sort of like growth or learning or
Mm,
some sort of challenge, right? Something to continually push myself.
yeah.
That can take any number of different like shapes. Give me
Mhm.
in pretty much anything.
Definitely.
I have another one around. This one's sort of similar. This is one that I'm trying to like. Is this the same thing? Is this different? But around creativity,
Mm,
um, because separate. I don't know if it's separate. Sort of like testing my boundaries. I also just like to try new things, right? Like a novelty sort of
mm,
piece. I know that I start feeling really stagnant without um more novelty than average, I would guess. Like, for example, I need to listen to like 50 new songs every week because I just get sick of music so fast. So things like that. Let's see what else is in there. Relationships is another one for me, and that just include, I mean, it's like a loved ones bucket, right? It's just making sure that those are all like strong and healthy. And uh for example, of one of the things that I've sort of like tightened up on, that value to me, I used to think like, oh, I need to have um just like good relationships with a ton of people or meet and have really tight relationships with as many people as possible. I still like to treat people well or aim to treat people well, but it's way less about like, oh, I need to develop deep relationships with everyone. I just need to, like, just those core relationships are the ones that I
mm,
need to worry about being like good and strong. So that's like a misstep that I've had in the past.
mhm.
Um, those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah. No, actually, I think I might steal a couple of those because I was like, oh, that is an important value to me, but I didn't even think about it on my list. But for myself, definitely health is are definitely on there, as well as family, that I had mentioned. But growth, yeah, that is a huge value of mine that I really prioritize, and like I'm constantly trying to better myself in my personal development, as well as like something I've learned in what I want in a partner, which I had to have multiple relationships to figure out that this is a value for me, is like having my partner value personal growth and development is important for me as well. That's huge. A couple others that I can think of that might rotate through my list is authenticity, which kind of maybe sort of aligns with like being honest and authenticity. I mean, they're slightly different, but that's a big value for me. Or and then I don't know, it kind of like is also vaguely similar to like integrity or like siblings in the values department, I guess, to some degree. But yeah, those would be mine that I can think of off the top of my head.
While you were sort of talking about this, I'd be curious if this is the same for you, but I have found that there are certain values that I have to struggle or maybe be more mindful with to live in alignment with, and there are other ones that come extremely naturally to the point that it's almost no effort whatsoever. So
Right.
for example, one of my values that I don't even mention, I never put on a whiteboard and never do anything because it's so ingrained in me that I struggle to do otherwise, but it's like reliability, right? Like
Oh
I hate not keeping my word. I
yeah.
hate not being doing just basically just doing what I say I'm going to do. So like that is a value for me and a very very strong one, and I get very frustrated with myself if I don't keep that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it never ends up on my like list of values or on whiteboards or anything like that because it's so easy for me. Like most of the time, like the vast majority of the time I'm acting in that way. I would just be curious if you have certain values that you feel like never end up on your list because they're too ingrained. Because I'm just realizing now all mine are sort of aspirational-ish.
Right. Yeah, like, and I'm constantly working at it, but similar to you, I think reliability is a similar trait we have in that's how we created this podcast. We reliably showed up for it for the last wait, has it been 2 or 3 years now? I know, I've lost track of time. 2020 is when we start. It's been 3 years. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's something I don't really, put like I'm striving for, because it's like just a given in a way. And I'm trying to think of another thing that's kind of a given. It made me think of like I have a habits tracker sheet. And some habits I'm like, why do I even put this on my habit sheets? I know I'm gonna do it. I don't really put it, like take my supplements. Like I haven't missed a day in like months. So it's like I don't really, but I just like to get the check mark because some of the other habits are really bad. I just can't seem to be consistent. And it's a struggle to like be consistent with those. But yeah, I can't think of any that are like important to me. I think I'd have to look at a list. Oh, and this is the other thing I wanted to mention. It's like if you look at a list of values and you're going to be like, well, these all sound good, maybe highlight or circle like the ones that resonate with you the most. And obviously that's still going to be probably more than 5, most likely, if I were to look at a big list of values. But out of the ones that you highlight, then look through those more deeply and try to like narrow it down. So maybe you have to go through 2 or 3 cycles of like thinning the herd until you get to the ones that are really like you can't live without. But I do agree with the fact that like some values, like even though family is super important to me, I will admit I'm not always doing the actions in alignment with that. Like, am I constantly trying to connect with every member of my family? That's not the case. No. I'm connecting with some of the members. Does that still count? And sometimes I'm like, I don't even want to be near any of one, and I need some alone time and some space. So I don't know. And that's a thing that I have to like put in place, because it's like it's so easy to get caught up in like work or life or other things and distractions. And I think we take our family and our loved ones for granted sometimes because we're like, oh, they'll be understanding. But I do make it a point to, like with my significant other, like we have a scheduled date night every week. So I know like that quality time is just built in automatically, even though it's, the amount of quality time that we get together is small in comparison to everything else I do in the week, but it's still something I set aside for something that's important to me.
Yeah, while you were sort of talking through that, it made me, I'm curious how this resonates with you, but it made me realize that maybe a good way to sort through values is doing sort of a gut check on how bad it would feel to be not associated with a particular value. So by that I mean, if someone were to think of me or consider me as just like a not reliable person, I would be pretty frustrated. In the same way, if I was thought of as like, oh, this guy doesn't care about his relationships, or like this guy doesn't care about his health. But as I say those things, I can already sort of sort some of the values, right? Like it's a little bit less like if someone sees me as someone who doesn't care about my health, I'd be confused, but not like frustrated. But for like some of the, like the family and the reliability stuff, I would be very just like almost offended. Like,
what are you talking about?
so that might be, and I haven't gone through, I just thought of this, so I haven't gone through enough examples to see how well this totally pans out, but it might be just one other strategy for sort of sorting through values. Because I think for me it maps pretty well. There's other stuff that I care about less, that if other people saw me as not like some of these other things, I'd be less offended than other ones.
Right. Yeah, and I think it also depends on, who is perceiving you, because it's like if it's someone like a stranger that you had like one meeting for and they only have that point of reference and you happen to be late because you were in a car accident, then it's like they might like, this guy is so unreliable, but they don't know like the backstory. They haven't had much history with you.
Yeah.
So it's more like thinking about like who knows you best, and maybe utilizing those people to help you evaluate. Like it'd be an interesting experiment to see, like, if you ask your closest friends or family members to be like, okay, what do you think my values are? And it's like, see if it kind of matches with what you think your values are. And when I think about that, like, I would say that my significant other and my closest friends and family members would probably, I think for the most part, say like similar things to what I think. But I don't know. I'd have to ask them to be sure. But I'm pretty sure they would definitely say like family and health are important to me, because I make it a point to, with all the things that I've done. I think they would be in agreement with that.
Yeah, they will, like, your friends and family won't have the full context of every single thing you do in your life, but
Right.
it could be a good extra sort of measure to check alignment, because you could think that one of your values is health, and
Mhm.
if all of your friends and family think like, oh, this person doesn't value health at all, then at the very least your behaviors are probably not in alignment. They might be,
Yeah.
but it's definitely maybe not a red flag, but like a yellow flag, a warning flag that like
Right.
if no one else can see that value, then you
Mhm.
may not be acting it out as well as you think you are, and you may not be in very good alignment with that value.
Mhm. Yeah, potentially. Or I mean, or maybe you're just not communicating like some of the things you're doing. And in that case, maybe you're not as close and connected, because it's like maybe you do work out every day and you eat really well, but you don't share that with people. So then how would they know for incidents? But
Yeah, I
um
was kind of thinking of examples where, and you've probably seen this before, but people claim their values are one thing and you see them doing something else.
right.
Like, I've had some people be like, "Yeah, I'm a really honest guy," and then I see like the sort of things that they're involved in, and their behaviors and stuff, and it's like, this dude's
Right.
lying all the time, like all the time.
Like, really? And this is
So,
value? Yeah.
uh, that's the sort of like values mismatch that I've seen before, where people sort of have one idea of a value that they have, and
Mhm.
their behaviors do not really seem to align with that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, another thing I wanted to bring up is that when people are reacting to certain situations that upset them, it's not necessarily like the thing, it's like underneath it all, it could be like that person or whatever is happening is kind of not in alignment with your values, which is why it's creating so
Mm,
much upset for
mm,
you potentially. Like, trying to think of an example, like if someone, you know, um hurt someone in your family, like like that, like you would be angry and upset, and underneath it all, it's like, yeah, you were really and if you think about like the underlying value that's kind of creating the rage and the upset, then it might help potentially diffuse the anger. I don't know, potentially. But it's just something I think, maybe not always the case, but it could help you be more reflective of the source of certain emotions.
yeah, that specific example is probably one that most people will be pretty frustrated with, but I think it dovetails nicely into sort of how you think about sort of accepting others or where your differences are, right? Because while you were talking about that, I was thinking, so with one of my values being health,
Mhm.
one of the things that drives me nuts and is such a struggle for me is when people in my family are facing health problems
Mhm.
with very clearly defined behaviors to get out of those problems, and they will not take action on them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, for me, being able to recognize, okay, I have a value of health,
Mhm.
their health value must be ordered somewhere else
Yeah.
on this chain.
Mhm.
So the way to, well, first of all, for just like understanding purposes or like empathy purposes, that helps. And then second, for sort of communication purposes, I feel like it's helpful to try to understand what other things they might be placing first. So it could simply be a habits issue, right? And that's one thing, like an action alignment sort of thing. They need better tools, better systems, whatever else. But it may also be that they genuinely just don't care about it. Like it's not nearly as important to them as some other thing.
Mhm.
So for me, sort of thinking about it in that way opens up a little bit more empathy and ways to communicate that are probably going to land better than simply coming from my set of values and just saying like, okay, it's really simple. Like you have a health problem. You're not taking the actions you need to get rid of it. Start doing it because
Mhm.
it's important. I need you to do it because it's important.
Right.
But it may not be important to them in the same way.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make. And for some people, it's not their value. That's okay. It's like not everyone's going to have the same values. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Is there any final thoughts that you had about values?
The only other thing I have is, if it still feels nebulous or sort of a little bit too hard to pin down for people, I would continue sort of like looking at resources, trying to learn about them, trying to figure out how to tie values in because they are really useful. And it took me a long time to figure that out and to figure out how they fit in, but they are valuable, and it's not just like pie in the sky, like ooh, airy, ooh, values. Look at all these positive things you could be. There is sort of like decision making and personal value around figuring
Mm,
some of this stuff out.
yeah, absolutely. Agree. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.